So I started at Google in 2005. And my first week, walking down the hall, I run into Larry Page. You know Larry Page. So he asked me, so Dan, welcome to Google. What do you do? I said, I study how people search. And he says, I know how to search. What do you mean? They start using Google, and in 2 weeks they become expert at it. And I said, I'm going to study that. And here it is 13 and a half years later, and I'm still studying that. Which means that either I'm a terrible researcher, or the problem is deeper than you thought. And I think that a lot of us not. Maybe not you, but a lot of the rest of the world sort of thinks, I know how to use Google. Why should I take a class in it? Why should I learn anything else about it? That's the point of this talk, actually. Because one of the big surprises to me, and I think to the people at Google, is that in fact, everyone does not natively think about the structure of an index, or they think about crawling, or they think about retrieval. So they in fact learn how to use Google, and I would argue probably most online technologies, from friends. And it's deeply true. I mean, this has been one of the big surprises for me, is when I go around the different universities, I ask librarians, do you teach a class on information retrieval? Do you teach a class on how to use library? Universally, they say, of course we do. And of course, all of our students go there. But when I talk to student groups, and I say, have you taken a class at the library? They say, what? What are you talking about? So there's a mismatch here between what's being taught versus what's being heard. One of the really interesting things is my discovery that people actually learn most of what they know about Google from their friends. And a little bit from classes. But it's 90 to 10. It's not 10 to 90. So that surprises me. And it motivates a lot of things, because we have built a computer the size of the planet. We have tens of thousands of cores at your bidding. You type in a question like this one, what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Hey, what's the answer? Go to Google and type that in, and it says it's 42. We're not quite at the size of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy meta computer, but we're getting there. More importantly, we're sort of a verb. We have succeeded. You Google things. I've interviewed people who are using Yahoo, and they say to me, oh, let me Google that for you. On Yahoo? Yes. Okay. You know, the copyright people go crazy, but it's true. We have become a verb. And we also make available all kinds of interesting resources for you, for the using public. So this is a query for basketball, and I focused it down to Raleigh-Durham. This is Google Trends. How many people use Google Trends? So the rest of you, take a note, check it out. Because you can go check out the query volume for that region, by country, by state, by county, and so on. So this is basketball over the past 5 years in this area. No surprise, right? Any of you wearing Carolina blue are not surprised by this, okay? But what you might be surprised by is this, because I looked for the related topics associated with query basketball, and you see on the left, NCAA men's basketball, number 2, Zion Williamson. Who's he? It's surprising to me that that's number 2 in the Raleigh-Durham area. Well, maybe not so surprising, but there are a lot of people who are either doing competitive intelligence or they have envy. He doesn't go to Carolina, right? Just check him. Just check him, right? So one of the things, my entire career has really been trying to understand, how do people search? What do they do with that information? So a long time ago, I wrote a paper on sense making. How do people find, aggregate, accumulate, organize, and then use information? Since that time, in the 90s, up till now, I've been studying how people search and what they do. And that led me to write this book, which I'll talk about today, which is available on pre-order on Amazon. And it's a book about search, but it's not like any book you've seen. Because most books, and you can buy a zillion of them on Amazon now, about how to Google, Googlepedia, right? How to do effective power searching. The problem with them is that they're all chapter 21, how in URL operator works. That's not a book, that's documentation. Right? So this book is really a set of stories about how to effectively do online research. And this really grew out of my experience as a researcher at Google, where I have done a lot of studies over the years. So I've done more than 300 field studies, more than 500 classes. I've done hundreds of surveys. I've run a MOOC, which was fairly successful. We've had 4.1 million students go through it, which means, just as an aside, it's all based on YouTube videos. They're all 5 minutes long. If you go and look up the number of watches for each of those videos, because you can do that, and then multiply by the number of students who watched that video, I have been on someone's screen for 425 years. So I think I get some kind of teaching award for that. For longest surviving tenured faculty or something. So I've done a lot with a lot of students over the time. And each of these kind of gives me a picture, a view of the kaleidoscope of how people search and what they're doing with it. Now, you've probably seen models like this, where you have this sort of canonical normative model. Now, what we think of as going on here is people start with that task identification, they then go to their search engine, they identify that, they then do their typical normative model, right? You have probably taught this model in your class. How many of you have spent days and days and days watching real people do real work in their home or their workplace? They don't do this! Are you surprised? Here's the reality. They do that. They perseverate on typing something, typing something, typing something. And so their evaluation time is measured in the seconds, or perhaps milliseconds. Right? So we like to think of ourselves as moving gracefully from a model like this. Does anybody recognize this? Only gray-headed people recognize it. This is the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. How many people have used one? Okay, nobody over the age of 30 is raising their hands. Okay, let me tell you what this is. It is an index that is updated periodically to the magazine and journal literature. So you could, for example, look up something like, say here, high technology industries, and you get 4 hits. 4 hits! Are you crazy? Well, the assumption that's baked into this is that it's scoped over a particular set of journals, a particular set of magazines, and it's incremental update, which means if you actually want to get all the hits for that search term, you've got to go back in time through all the volumes and do it year by year by year. And of course, you could, if you're really rich, you could go photocopy it for a page for a quarter, right? People remember this? Yeah. These were the bad old days. They really were bad. So this, of course, is kind of the normative model of the way people think about information repositories, right? The library. But magazines look like this, and of course, there's an infinitely deep stack on all these things, and of course, the real question is, does the periodical guide actually cover the journals I'm interested in? Does it cover the Lithuanian Journal of Epidemiology? Probably not. Right. So you've got this interesting problem. So the assumption that we had as baby information retrieval people back in the day was that we would have something like the library, something like that would actually collect and curate, and we did not realize, I did not realize, how small that collection was. That collection was indexed by this. How many people have used one of these? Okay? There's a significant fraction, I'd say half of you have not raised your hand. Okay? This is a card catalog, right? And it's sorted by, in this case, by author's name, right? There are other card catalogs that are sorted by different sort orders, say topic or something, right? But there is no card catalog that's sorted by author's middle name. You could do that, but how long would it take you? Now, of course, you would just absorb that into a spreadsheet, say a big Excel spreadsheet, and click on middle name, click, and you've got 100,000 records sorted by middle name. So our expectations of what you can do with an index are very different than what you could do with that. God help you if you figure out exactly what volume number you have to go look up and then it's not there. So I've done a lot of videos, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you this video. I will summarize it, though, by saying this is a webmaster at Stanford. And we're talking about the kinds of stuff she searches for online. Remind you, she's a webmaster at Stanford University. And she says in this video, you know, I do these searches, but 95% of what I find is crap. Really? Why is that? So what's happened, I said I'm going to skip through that. There we go. What has happened is that we have basically made a universe of content available to you. This is sort of the dream that we've all had, which we would create the Alexandria Library all over again. Make all volumes available 24/7, indexed, available, searchable, findable, right? And in some sense, we've done that. We've broken the canon barrier. We've broken the collection barrier of libraries. So here you go. You want the Library of Congress? There you go. You want the Bodleian Library? There you go. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got all this. And in some sense, this is a little bit like what Google Books is trying to do. But that's just books. And as you know, we now live in a slightly different information world. How many YouTube videos are there? So when I talk to people, one of the things I do is I talk to them about, well, how does Google really work? So I've asked a lot of people in classes to draw me, I'll give you a sheet of paper, you have 5 minutes, draw me a little model of how Google works. And this is from a computer science major, right? Let me tell you something interesting. They mostly don't look like that. When you ask real people to actually draw a model of Google, meaning not computer science majors who are not real, right? But when you ask non-computer scientists to draw a picture of Google, they basically give you things that look a little bit like this. There we go. Non-concentric overlapping Boolean targets. I once did this last year at a class at a high school that showed Romana names, not here, somewhere else. And I got back 30 drawings, 10 of which had the word magic somewhere on it. That tells me, and it should tell you a lot, people don't know. They fundamentally don't know. And this is interesting, and it's compounded by the fact that the amount of information we have is just staggering. We scan upward of 20 million books. Every 24 hours, every minute rather, 24 hours of content is uploaded to YouTube. That's it's been, 15 minutes since we started? 15 times 24 hours? We've got 15 days worth of YouTube content uploaded since we started. 15 days. We get X billion images in YouTube, 5 billion from Flickr. There are 78,000 anteater pictures. You see the problem here, right? It's all searchable. So you can answer questions like the population of Japan or how tall is the empire building, because we have built a search engine that allows you to ask questions like that and actually get to the answer very quickly. Or what is 20,000 leagues in a mile, or the airspeed of an unladen swallow? That actually works. And it works because we've done this really remarkable thing of leveraging everything we've learned over the years about the structure of information, the structure of words, the structure, how to build indexing structures and so on. So it's not just that there's a lot, but that rate of ingestion is going up. So think of it as like there's one Library of Congress being added per day and the rate is growing. Okay? So how do people think about all that stuff? This is the Larry Page question. How do people think that they can use Google to find this? So let me show you a short video. And I want you to listen primarily to what he's saying, because what this video is showing is this person has been given the task of find something to do on Saturday night in San Francisco. Fine. So this is an eye tracking study. Ignore the pink dot. But let's see what he says. I love this piece of video because you can hear Laura nervously laughing in the background. Why is that funny? This guy comes to my lab, sits down, and he goes through the whole study, and we ask him this simple question. Why is it something to do? And yet he does not know that big parts of the internet contain salacious content. So the next query he does, which I can't show you, is adult activities, San Francisco, Saturday night. Can't go there, right? How is it possible? He doesn't know this. How is it possible? So the deeper question, I think, for us is, what do people know is available on the internet through research? Obviously, he missed part of that lesson. He was out that afternoon. Now, we've succeeded in many ways. We have as a field, have done marvelous things, but there are still questions that are really hard to answer. The population of Japan in 1490. Trust me, none of these work on Google. How much does the Empire State Building weigh? Or what's the best eye school in the world? You'll get results, you won't get answers. These require some thought, some thinking. And so that's really sort of what drove me, because people would ask me questions like this. I'm driving down I-5 in California. I see this mountain. What is it? Why is it here? It's really striking because it's in the middle of an otherwise flat plain. Or I get questions like this, and because I work at Google, I get questions like this a lot. What does that say? Or, better yet, what does that say? Or, what's that flower? Or, what bit my son? Can you find a facsimile of Stravinsky's Sacre de Printemps? I can. Can you? This is not a Googleable thing. You actually can, but you need to know something. And so it's that gap between what people think is possible versus what you can actually do that drove all of my writing in the past several years, in particular this book. Because I want people to understand that not all information is instantly reliable. So for example, you could do this. There's an app for that. Do not trust this app. Right? It has nothing but 5-star reviews, but those are the people who survived. You see my point? Right? So how do people think about these things? What does it mean to have a keyword search in the age of Google when you know that we deal with things like bigrams and so on? Is Google partial text indexing? Can you use a star operator to do word completion? What's covered in the results? How do you blend results from different corpora? So what's so interesting to me is that basically mental models, as far as I can tell, and I'm summarizing here 10 years of work, are extremely variable, and that's being generous. There are people who literally believe everything is on Google. Literally believe that. And yet there are other people who sort of know otherwise, right? So I have another video here. Again, I'm going to skip this guy. He basically, the punchline here is, everything's on Google. I have never searched for anything I couldn't find. Think about that. I have never searched for anything I couldn't find. Which to me indicates a kind of impoverishment of the soul. But there are people who seriously believe that, right? So an interesting question for us as information retrieval people is, how do people think about, for example, what content is indexed and how is it indexed? For example, can you do a search for images in this Street View image archive? Can you? Yes? People raise your hand. Can you search for images in the Street View image archive? Very smart. People are just looking at me, they have no idea. The answer is you can't. But why not? Long, complicated problem. So I've been doing lots of studies over the years, including one of the like this, which is, here's a house in downtown Palo Alto, 900 University Avenue. Beautiful house. I know it looks like anybody's house in Carolina, but whatever. This is rare in Palo Alto, California. And I asked a simple question. Can you find me an aerial image of that house pre-1977? How hard is that? Is that hard? Raise your hand. Would it easy? Raise your hand. Okay? Obviously, I set you up, right? This isn't a hard question. I wouldn't be telling you about it otherwise. So I asked 250 software engineers at Google this question. I gave them 7 minutes to find the answer. 0 were able to do it. None. And these are pretty smart people. So then I did another study. I asked 2,000 mechanical Turkers. 1 person out of 2,000 was able to answer that question. Why is this so hard? I think importantly for us as researchers, could you have predicted the level of difficulty given the problem statement? Not without knowing a lot about the structure of content on the net and a way to find it. Now, I'll show you, actually there is an answer in Google Books. Oh yeah, Google Books, I forgot the search there, right? There's an interesting, rather obscure historical aerial archive site there, but the answer that I thought everybody at Google would know, and they didn't think of, was Google Earth, all right? How many of you know that Google Earth has an image archive function? How many? Okay. We got, say, 50 people here. There are 3 people who said yes. Okay. We have a marketing problem, or to flip it the other way, we have an education problem. Why don't people know about this? This is a picture of that street from 1948. Right? You can zoom in and take a very nice look at that house. Why don't people know this? So this is kind of what motivated me, is thinking about how can I elevate all of us to be better searchers. And not just because I work at Google. I genuinely want people to be better at discovery, better understanding, able to ask questions, be curious. I was thinking about this because a couple of years ago my son asked me, he's a basketball fan, but he goes to Stanford basketball games, and there's this song that people sing at basketball games. I bet they do it here too. And this is Stanford basketball at its best. Have you heard this song before? Have you sung this song before? What's the title of this song? Right, nobody knows. Stop, that's enough. So he says, Dad, I want that on my phone so I can listen to it and be pumped up for the next game, right? And I think about that and I say, I work at Google. Well, the obvious solution, which is to go to Shazam or SoundHound or something like that, will not work because that is a recording of 1,000 drunken fans screaming at the top of their lungs. And these only match with clean, digitally recorded, copyrighted archived materials. Okay, I think about lyric search. Let's do lyric search. What are the lyrics? Right. Right. And I said, son, give up. It's not going to happen. Being my son, he immediately goes to Google and types in the lyrics, oh. See that first hit, the first suggestion? He now has the song on his phone. What did I miss? What did I miss? I didn't understand that the world has been evolving. And now there are billions of QA sites, not literally, but there are thousands and thousands of question answering sites where people ask, what's that song that goes, oh. And it only takes one person to give the correct answer before it gets indexed properly. Okay? The world is different, and importantly, the world is changing. Because now, of course, I can ask for San Chappelle stained glass, and I get an image like that. Or I could go, for example, to do a query like Angkor Wat, and I can find these beautiful 3D models of Angkor Wat that I could fly through the way I'd like. Here's a problem. That picture of San Chappelle, or this Google Cultural Institute website in Angkor Wat, are on page 3 and 4 of the search results. You kind of already have to know it exists before you'll get here. Because nobody goes to page 3. You know that, right? So what can we do? How can we tell people that in the Google Online Archive, there's the Afro-American Ledger, which has been published in Baltimore. It's a historically black newspaper. It's been published for over 100 years. And you can find it using Google News Archives. So the important question for me, the motivating question for me, what do art searchers need to know about doing search online? This is kind of what a lot of us are researching these days. How can we do these little nuancey things? But the reality is, people don't know how to choose keywords. Right? I was teaching a class of 6th graders, and they had to do a book report. They had to do a report about the ecosystem of jungles in Costa Rica. I'm watching a student, and he's typing in the query, and I think this is it. This is the moment of keyword choice, and he types in sweaty clothes. And I ask him, so why is that your query? And he says, well, if I was in the jungle in Costa Rica, I'd have sweaty clothes, and so, right? Right? This is not the training we need. I mean, we need to help people understand what keywords are and why they would be relevant. I mean, you laugh, but people do this all the time. You should sit in on a couple hundred of my classes and watch people do this. Even people at places that you would not expect it. So here's chapter 2 of my book. And I start off with kind of a punchy example because I want to get people motivated. So here's a photograph somebody sends me and asks the question, what's the phone number of the office from which this image was taken? Question for you, think about this. How would you solve this problem? What's the index for this? This is like the keyword choice problem. So, chapter 2, I tell you how to do it. Well, the first heuristic is work with what you've got. If you zoom in at the very top, it's hard to see in the back, in the cheap seats back there. The people in the front seats can see that it says TP at the very top. Okay? So if you Google, and I'm not kidding, TP office building, you will discover in the images that this building is in Warsaw. We've just discovered the city. Now what? Once you do that, we could just go to this one. I go to Google Earth, and I go to the Turn On 3D buildings, and I fly to that location using my controllers, like a video game. I fly to that location, that street location, and I look. Yes, that's the building. This is the model, right? This is the 3D model. That's the image. So I fly to the place where they line up. And I do that database operation that you learned in Databases 101, which is not join and foreign key, but turn around and look at the building behind you. Right? Nobody told you that. But it's possible. Second step, you take the picture that I gave you in the beginning. If you zoom in, you can see that sort of swirl of color there. If you flip vertical, that graphic operation, you can see, again, cheap seat, sorry, people in front can see it says Google in it. This person took the shot through a window and it got the mirror image of the logo of Google in it. Now you know something. So you can go to Google Office Warsaw, and there's the street address. Oh, there's the phone number. So what sounds impossible is actually not hard. This took me 2 minutes, right? Not because I'm a personal investigator, but because I know how to string resources together. I take the picture, I look up the logo at the top of the building, I go to Google Images, I find out where it's located, and so on, right? But you have to know these resources exist and how to manipulate them. So what just happened? I just told you a story, right? And this story demonstrates a bunch of things. Not all search sessions take 30 seconds. I know the majority do, but some take longer. You can find the answer if you know how to link these resources together. Importantly, this story teaches you a lot of things. Sometimes you actually have to transform the data. In this case, I did flip vertical. Not everything is available through web search. Surprise! Not everything is available through web search. Now, sorry, Gary, I'll go back. Okay, you got it? Now, let me add an interesting twist to this. The Google you use today is not the Google you used yesterday. And it's definitely not the Google we shipped in 1998, 97. So let's just look at some of the UIs over the years. That's 99, 2001. You see what happens. The offerings and the UI and the experience and what you can search through have changed tremendously, sometimes month to month. So here, for example, you have all the different types of content. You could search, for example, something called frugal, which you would now think of as Google Shopping. It got changed, the name changed because there's no way to write that word frugal and make the same wordplay in Japanese. Doesn't internationalize very well. Oh my gosh, you have to think about that? Yes, we have to think about that. So now we're in 2008. We've got all this stuff, including advanced search on the far right-hand side. We then introduced suggestions by compiling queries that people have done in the past. So we're giving you all kinds of new things, all kinds of new capabilities, including all kinds of UI things like that web and show options. We've tried thousands upon thousands of different UI treatments. Most of them you don't see because they don't work. That's a big lesson for people doing research in this. Most of what you try does not work. Don't worry, it's a good thing, right? We've done things like this and so on and so on and so on and on and on. But the interesting thing from a user's perspective is you constantly have to stay up on this. Does anybody remember the timeline view? Yeah, a couple of people. There's an interesting reason, that's a separate talk, why we don't do that anymore. But that was a feature for a while. You see my point? What's possible to find changes moment to moment. Moment to moment, right? So what kinds of things can you find? Let me ask you. What kinds of things can you find? Can you find a picture of Britney Spears? Yes? Oh, yeah, okay. How about a picture of Rula Lenska? Does anybody know who Rula Lenska is? Was? She was an actress. Could you find a picture of her from the 30s? What do you think? Prediction? Yes or no? Yes? Yeah, probably. Wow, you guys trust in Wikipedia, don't you? How about a picture of your grandmother? Yeah? Okay. How about a picture of my grandmother? I'm asking you this because I'm probing what you know about what's possible to search for. So, for example, could you find a picture of Ted Williams hitting a home run? Yeah, you can find a video for sure, right? How about a picture of my grandmother hitting a home run? So all of a sudden, the deep point here is understanding the nature of what's possible to find is not just knowing query syntax. It's not just understanding what the UI widgets are. It's having a deep understanding of the world, right? You cannot escape the value of knowledge in doing searches. So here, for example, we try, if you do a search like this for Pharrell Williams, you get a nicely composed page. This is roughly version 1012 of that page. Of course, you do it on the mobile device, you get a slightly different one. So web and mobile are different in interesting ways. And so here, of course, I changed the question to be Pharrell Williams concerts, and you see all the events showing up because we parse the metadata of event tags on websites. And we surface that if you ask for it. Which is super interesting because now you can ask for things like jazz events in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And you get this nice list of stuff here, and there's more below that. How many of you know about this? That we pull out the event metadata and allow you to search for it. Right? So this brings up now an interesting skill component. We can do that, we can surface that. And here I've done a query for Saratoga Library. Now, I live in Silicon Valley. A very nice part of Silicon Valley is the town of Saratoga, right? So the Saratoga Library, hey, it's great. And there are even some events here, right? Now, question for you. You look at the events, Saratoga Library, and you see one here highlighted. It says New York Tenants Justice League. Interesting. So a real skill for people to have when they're searching, when they're reading search results, is doing common sense reasoning over the results. So if you drill down on that event, you see it's the New York Tenants Justice League, Saratoga Library, Saratoga, California, but the source is this obscure bklynlibrary.org. What's that? You drill down on that and you discover it's the New York Tenants Justice League at the Brooklyn Library because they have a branch called Saratoga. Yeah. You see the confusion? So all of a sudden we have to develop in our students and in ourselves this, what I call informancy. You might call it information literacy, but I mean something a little bit different. I mean the collision of real-world common sense knowledge as pertains to using information resources. Yes, I can teach you all about Boolean. Yes, I can teach you about keyword choice. But if you don't have common sense, you don't have this background knowledge, you won't know how to do all this stuff. Give you an example. So there are many different kinds. This is a partial list of different genre, different media types that we have online. So for example, you can visualize and search through data sets. So we've got this thing called Google Public Data Sets. You could do that. And you could do all kinds of searches for things. Let me fast forward you to chapter 17. I'm going to tell you another story. As an example of the kinds of things you can search for if you know how. And you have this common sense knowledge, this informancy. So, this date is a little wrong. I'm not that old. But in 2016, I was in Greece, and this is an island called Delos. You take the archaeological tour of Delos, you will see at the end of the tour this plinth, this sort of piece of marble with all this graffiti on it. And if you look sort of dead in the middle there, it says, Captain M.C. Perry, USN 1826. And I said, you're kidding. Really? That M.C. Perry, 1826? And the tour guide said, I do not know who you talk about. But historians would recognize Matthew Perry as being the commodore of the U.S. fleet that opened Japan in 1831. So I thought, is it really that one? I'm a Google guy. I can figure this out, right? So I immediately go and do the obvious search, and I get these results, which are fine but not helpful. So chapter 17 or 18 basically walks you through the process, tells you the story of how to go from that to searching for archival index like this, and clicking on Find in a Library, and I discover, actually, the logbook of the ship USS North Carolina, which was the ship Matthew Perry was on in 1826 in the Mediterranean, is here, in the archives here. So Katie, are you in the audience? Yay! Thank you, Katie. Katie there went and actually looked for this thing and pulled it out, and we were looking through it, and you sent me those nice images. And the answer is not in the logbook. It's great. It's a great resource. And so I was asking around, and after Katie's valiant effort here at Chapel Hill, I ended up going to another library, the Eleutherian Library in Wilmington, Delaware, do the same operation. I find basically the same logbook, written in another hand. Someone else wrote it. And that didn't work either. So I ended up in the reading room of the archives of the Library of Congress, where they have a third copy. Did you know that 19th century sailing vessels had usually 2 or 3 copies of the logbook? Right. Nobody knows that. I do now you do, right? So I go there, and I end up there, and I pull I get to fill out the slip, and the guy brings it to me, and I'm looking through it, and I turn to the right page, the page that Katie found. So depressing. I know they're there because the logbook that Katie found and the one I found at Eleutherian and the Library of Congress looks like this. And down here at the bottom, it says Isle of Delos. They give some hours that they were there. Fine. But I don't know if they actually went on shore, right? I have a gun, but it's not smoking, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, I just wasted a lot of time. The archivist comes over and says, so what's up? And I tell him this whole story. He says, oh, you want the letters. What do you mean letters? Turns out that if you're the captain of an 19th century sailing vessel, you would write letters home to your sweetheart, Minerva, who lived in Washington, D.C. And because mail transmission was unreliable, you would keep a copy on ship. All right? I would write a letter to Minerva, send it off. It may take a month or 2 or 3, but I got the original here. So if that never makes it, I can show her, I proved to her I wrote it. Right? So this letter made me infinitely happy because I'll show you the transcription here. I also learned how to read that handwriting. The killer here is, I have at this time on board the NC, that is the ship, as many relics of one kind or another as would load 10 wagons, and among them number 2 white marble altars with temples of Apollo and Diana and Delos. That big piece of marble I showed you is the bottom of the temple of Apollo, where Matthew Perry shipped his name. Right? This is the gun and it's smoking. The deep point here, is that not everything is available through web search. Sometimes you got to go to the library. Sometimes you have to go to multiple libraries. Sometimes you ask your friend Kay to help you out with the library, right? There's a couple lessons here, one of which is social interaction really counts for a lot. If the archivist had not told me about the letters, I would still be stuck, right? If I hadn't physically traveled to all these places, I would still be stuck. If I hadn't been able to find the finding aids online that told me where these things were in the first place, I'd be stuck. So there's a whole series of steps from formulation of the query, the initial research question, all the way to finding that. And that's what informancy is all about. So my book is really trying to tell you all these different stories about how to do that. Because, we know how often people search. You know how often the random person searches in the world? Less than once a week, right? Yet they are super confident in their ability to do that. 66% less than one a day. So in a world where people don't search very often, they don't get much practice. And if they don't get much practice, they don't have much skill, even though they may rate themselves very highly. Okay? So when you ask someone on a survey question, this is a piece of research advice. If they say, I'm highly skilled in searching, do not believe them. They are socially normed. I've had people fill out forms that they score themselves as a 5, and they couldn't find a paper bag if it was holding their lunch. Right? That kind of thing. So, for example, one of the things that has floored me is this finding. I found this about 5 or 6 years ago. Is I was interviewing all these people, and I would interview people, and they would be scrolling through a very long document. Scroll, 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 scroll. And it only takes like 10 minutes before you say, what are you doing? And they say, I'm searching for it. Anyway, obviously what you would do is Command F, or you would do it that way if you speak the other language, Control F. And so I did a bunch of studies because I couldn't believe that there are people who didn't know this, right? When I showed this result at Google, people could not believe this result. So I said, here's a sample web page. It's a 10K results. How long did Beth Smith take to run this race? Here's the response. I've since done this study with like a couple hundred people. Same curve. These are response times to answer that question. Remember, how long did it take her to run this race? How hard is that? Control F, Beth Smith, done, right? Well, here's 120 seconds, so that's 2 minutes. This is 5 minutes, and there are more people over here because they are searching through this line by line using visual search. Okay? That's thing one. Thing two is that people took more than 2 minutes. A quarter of their answers were wrong. This is the most trivial task you can do. Tell me how long she took. Turns out people who don't know Control F don't know Control C, Control V. All they have to do is paste that number into my little form, but they don't know that, so they try to do this, and they mistype something. A quarter of the answers were wrong. So this tells me a lot. So I did a bunch of surveys like this. Bottom line, 90% of the internet-using population in the US does not know this. 90%. That means I'm predicting there was somebody in this audience who didn't know this. Right? I've given that result at, shall we say, Ivy League computer science departments, and somebody asked, so what does Control F do? You think I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. right? So when you do studies like this, you end up asking questions like, why did Captain Cook visit Tahiti? You ask questions, you've probably seen questions like this. You've probably written questions like this. And here's the bottom line. This is my study right here. If you teach someone Control F, how much does it speed up their performance in search? And ignore what the other ones are. Those are all ranking changes, different experiments we've done. When you teach someone Control F, and it takes 30 seconds to do this, you make their total time to result 12% faster. That is an enormous win. Enormous win. You also increase their accuracy. You also teach them how to prove that something doesn't exist. Right? How often can you prove that something, Beth Smith was not in this race? I know definitively. So there are conventions about use, like Control F, and conventions about knowing genre and style and meaning. So you know about spoof sites. Everybody know what a spoof site is? Okay. You probably have seen this one then, right? Everyone's favorite spoof site, which notably was created by a teacher to teach website credibility, which has notoriously failed because every year thousands of students write learned essays about the tree octopus. You might not have seen that one, RYT Hospital, until you recognize at the very top that's an ad for their male pregnancy therapy. Male pregnancy, which does not exist as far as I know outside of movies. So people also then see things like this, and they go, wow, CNN reported this event? Really? You laugh. There are people who believe the Holy Father has created a miracle here. Seriously. And this is not a new problem, right? I mean, do I have a video here? Yes. Watch this little clip of video here. This is reportedly Edison's movie from the Spanish-American War, wherein it is reported that the sharpshooters behind a dead horse shooting at the enemy. Did you see the horse jump? Let me show you that again, because it's an interesting point. Watch the horse. That's not a dead horse, Jim. So Edison shot this in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This is nowhere near Cuba, right? So fake news has been with us since the beginning of time. And of course, we live in this world where this kind of stuff, fake video, is important. We have this challenge. We're getting lots of YouTube video every minute. Scholarly papers, lest you think you are immune from this, how many vampire or low-quality journals do you know about? Okay. Last year, there were 1.8 million papers in roughly 28,000 journals, including this paper that was in the International Journal of Advanced Computer Technology, which consists of one sentence repeated over and over and over and over, right? Well, they now have a hit on their Scholar page. And I'm going to skip over that because I just talked about that. I'm advancing here a little bit because I want to end up in this last section here, last couple of minutes. So one of the important points, I think, of all of our education efforts, of teaching people how to use Google, how to do online research and all this stuff, is how to ask questions, how to assess credibility of content. Because, I found this website, someone sent this to me and said, EPA facts, wow, can you believe this? The EPA is targeting farmers for plowing their own land. Really? So if you do actually go and search for that, you'll discover there's this nice about sentence that says it's a project of environmental policy alliance dedicated to highlighting high cost, blah, 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 right? Do you notice anything wrong yet? Your spidey sense should be tingling, right? Why? We're not highlighting anything here, but learned people who have informancy, have some common sense understanding about the Environmental Protection Agency, not the Environmental Policy Alliance. Okay? But when you look at the logos, there's EPA.gov, EPAFacts.com. What's going on? Well, what's going on here is that the Environmental Policy Alliance is at this street address. If you search for that street address, you'll find out that Berman and Company is at the same street address with the same suite number. Okay, that's suspicious. I don't think the EPA shares a suite with somebody in DC. So who are they? And that's the real street address for the real EPA. These guys are a lobbying firm in DC. It's their job. It's fine. They lobby for big ag, big oil, big pharma, and anti-environmental issues. So they created an entire fake agency called EPAFacts.com in order to diss the real EPA. Okay? Now here's the thing. Sam Weinberg at Stanford showed that 80% of university students, looking at you, cannot do this analysis that I just walked you through. 80%. Right? That should worry us because it indicates that we have this real problem. We have this real problem about teaching people how to be informant, how to be good, skilled users of all this plethora of content we've created and we've indexed and we've made available to you. So it's not just academics' problem. It's not just industrial problem. I think collectively we need to think about how to design these things. So I think this is a useful place where we can meet. How do we design these things to surface the information that's useful to help you, the searcher, understand? We need to teach people how to do this. So a while ago I built this MOOC called Power Searching with Google. We've had, now I think it's like 4.2, or I lose track. We had several million people go through this. Right? And the best graph of my entire professional career is here. Because we ran this study, I think the N here is like 300,000 or something, I forget. But this is the course. That's the 2-week period of when we taught the class. This is the pre-period, and that's the post-period. So the red line is people who signed up for the class and then dropped out of the class at some point. So what you're seeing here on the y-axis is their advanced searches per user per day. So roughly this is a fancy measure we created to measure the skill level of these searchers. Okay? So these people come in at about 0.4, and they go up a little bit because they're taking a few classes, and then they drop back because they drop out of the class. So they go back to 0.4. That's no surprise. You come in, you drop out, you don't get any better. The people who enter are also 0.4, and then the people who maintain, so this black line here, they go all the way up to 2, which is fantastic. It's a really high score. But faculty, pay attention. The moment they leave the class, their skill drops down. Okay? But the good news here is that it stabilizes out here at 0.8. Okay? So this is now 2.5 weeks after they left the class. So I would argue that's probably a permanent change in their behavior. What's happened is that we took these people from 0.4 to 0.8. We doubled their skill at searching in 2 weeks, and it maintains over time. The blue line, that's the rest of the world. So that's a sample size of about 1 million searchers, anonymized searchers. They're at like 0.1, which means the average searcher is not very good, not very skilled. So you can see here, though, a selection bias. The people who signed up for the course were already 4 times better than the average searcher. Okay. So what am I doing about it? Well, I work at Google. I teach classes. I do these field studies. I create this MOOC. I also write a blog. And the blog is called Search Research at Blogspot. So if you can't find it, I have failed miserably. But this blog basically led to the production and creation of my book. Because each one of these is some kind of investigation, asking what's possible to find, noticing how content changes. You're leaving, Katie. Don't leave. Thank you for coming here. We touch on one of these topics every week, and basically, it's really good because I think, in essence, why I've created with that blog is a community, a few thousand people, and we teach each other stuff. I've created a little social community of good searchers. So I have a bunch of friends. If you join, you have a bunch of friends too. And the best thing here about this is we tell each other stories. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I asked this question. Every Wednesday I ask a question. Yeah, next Wednesday I'll ask another question. About, for example, where does your plastic recycling go really? Not what they tell you. Where does it really go? It's an interesting question, right? How would you do that? So we then swap stories about how we discovered what the answer was. So that's the blog. It covers everything from how to actually go offline and do searches, how to actually use different resources online. In this case, how to search for songs by whistling. Right? Did you know there was a search engine for that? Yes. When you get an earworm, go read my blog and it will teach you in a little story how to do that. So I wrote this book because I wanted to share stories. So each chapter is another story. Because people don't remember documentation. This is sort of the big lesson of the 20th century. People read documentation, people write documentation, nobody remembers documentation. But people remember stories. So when I say, I remember that Greek island thing, and you couldn't find it online if you go to the archive, right? People will tell each other stories like that. There's a whole bunch of work on the currency and value of stories as an aid in a memoir, as a way to remember these deep lessons about search. So I want to end up with this. This is not optional anymore, right? You're all here. You already drank the Kool-Aid. You were in the choir singing the praises of Kool-Aid, right? For the rest of humanity, I think it's one of these things we have to take this on as an educational challenge. So I hope you will join me in this challenge. We need to help the world learn how to discover, learn how to follow their curiosity, and how to do good research. There's too much crap out there. We need to do a better job, both in moderating the amount of crap in the world, but also teaching people how to do realistic assessment, realistic discovery. Thank you very much. Rob's got a question.
So Dan, I've seen you talk about Control F before, and the amount of difference that made versus all the things that the great engineers and user interface designers come up with in the search interface. And every time I see that, I kind of think about, that's what I do. I try to do search user interface stuff. Should we all just go out and start educating people? Or do you still see rooms for...
Great question, actually, because it lets me say the following. No, the short answer is user design is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. You've probably seen these studies where if you change, for example, the wording on the button, it changes the click-through rate by like a factor of 5. So that's not trivial. That's a huge, huge, huge difference. Most of those measurements have been done in commercial venues. If you give it this sentence versus that sentence, you change the click-through rate and therefore the purchase rate by a factor of 5. But it's true for everything else as well. So, for example, changing something as simple as the color of text changes its readability. Do you know that? There are certain fonts you should avoid, like the plague. People have been setting the terrible, terrible, terrible things to web readers for a long time. Slowly, the culture is getting better. So I think absolutely the UX design, UI design is super critical. We still need to test it because, I will hold on to talk about this, your intuition sucks. And I don't mean you personally, I mean all of us. Me too. Because I have made UI changes where I thought, oh, this is going to increase usability by factor 4, and it actually damages it. So basically, intuition is really useful for creating. It's no good for evaluating. So it's kind of hand in hand between creation, design, and evaluation. Because, like I said, I've just seen this too many times. For example, we changed the color of some font on some ads we did, and made something like a 1.5% difference in click-through rate. But if you Google, that's like hundreds of millions of dollars. So I paid for myself for the rest of the time. I figured out my salary is going to pay for it to the year $32.95. So I'm free to go. Yeah. Anybody else?
Can you talk about quantifying return on investment in terms of training? So, I work at the Cancer Center. Do we have any sense of if we were to provide people with an hour or two of really effective training on searchability, effective searching, what that would really yield?
Thank you. Let me tell you another story.
Okay.
So I presented basically those slides, the control slides, and I showed the minus 12% total improvement in time to result. There was a guy sitting in the back who was from our, we have an internal raters group. Okay, it's kind of like our personal, we have a Google version of Mechanical Turk. We've got a few thousand people there. And he saw that and said, wait, if I teach my raters this control F thing, they'll be 12% faster. I said, yeah, probably. So I said, well, try it. So we did that, and we gave them that 30-second video image, how to use control F. And they now save a ton of money per year because they are 12% more effective. They have 12% higher throughput rate. So I actually have two data points with that, one of which is in terms of real money. So our raters are better than Mechanical Turkers because they know control F. Right? It's a stupid thing, but it's totally true. So we both save money and increase the throughput and increase the accuracy. So there's more fun products.
Thank you.
So some of the examples that you mentioned, there are cases where the information need is easily expressed, but it doesn't work because the most natural way for people to describe that information need is just not the way that Google searches, because there's a mismatch between the language that somebody would use to describe their need and the language being used to describe the content, right? If you're doing keyword matching and things like that. And so one way is to basically educate people to say, well, the most natural way for you to express this information need is not going to work, so you have to think about keywords that might appear in a relevant document. But the opposite to that is to then say, we need search algorithms that can respond to the ways that are natural for people to describe their needs. And I guess that's difficult for Google because you don't get to see that, right?
Well,
I mean, you might be able to get some of that from Q&A sites, but
well, yes, I understand where you're going. So, because I've heard it from my boss for about 10 years. Well, why don't you fix the algorithm, Dan? So we've been doing that. So increasingly, we're able to handle natural language queries. And we actually get a lot of those. We don't have to mind the QA sites. We get a lot of them through Google anyway. It's naive people type in queries like that. So we have a few million of those a day. And just watch for a month and you get a lot. So, so you're right in that the way it was kind of very databasey in some sense. You have to identify the user and so on and so on. Increasingly, we're adding more and more NLP. So, for example, you can now do phenomenal reference. You can say something like, how tall is Obama? How tall is his wife? Right? So that's a natural expression. I didn't have to go look up wife and Michelle and height and all that. So we're getting better and better. And as the assistant gets better and better, you're going to see more and more of that. I was telling Jerry, we have something like 600 linguists working at the right now. We have a ton of those. And this is almost all that they're doing. They're doing primarily what we call intent error identification, which are basically this kind of NLP. They're also doing something really fun, which is localization errors. So, for example, if you're in Kentucky, you go to this Louisville city, it's called Louisville, or however you say it. But in Colorado, that same city name is pronounced Louisville. Google Maps does it the right way, depending on what region you're in. So regionalization errors like that. So, for example, there's a big city, a big street in Silicon Valley called El Camino Real. It's not El Camino Real, right? So we get those pronunciations correct. But that's what language is doing. So we're moving in the natural language direction fast. Anybody else? Yes?
I have the opportunity to teach people who have maybe never done a search before in Google, just starting to learn, and wanted to know what you tell them, the first things to tell them, and if you've done any research on like all of us have some cursive knowledge. There's so much that, like, how do we overcome that?
An excellent question, because in essence, we are constantly being filled from the youth of America, the youth of the world. So you get a kid who's barely learning how to type, or learning how to hit the button and talk to the computer. And they are basically naive users, right? So it's an interesting question, though, because everybody is immersed in our culture where people do Google in movies, right? You hear podcasts where people say, well, I just Googled blah, 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 blah. They do that. So there are very few truly naive people. People in developing countries are often naive with respect to how do you frame a question for Google. So, yes, is the answer. We do a lot of study of that. In fact, I would say every week of the year we have another field study group going out somewhere to try to find people in Indonesia or Argentina or wherever in order to understand what they need to know and how we communicate that. So I think the short answer to your question is, right now, is just ask the simplest possible question in your natural language. So where is the best pizza in Chapel Hill? Right, I would do that. And then you might introduce the secondary thing, which is how to choose good keywords. So pizza, Chapel Hill. But I would start, this is totally different than what I would have said 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I would have said, teach keyword selection. Now I say, teach the simplest possible question. And then teach them keyword selection. So it's a little bit both. So that's a really interesting question, particularly because in India, for example, we have some of the best spoken natural language record for lots of languages that never had voice record before in the past. So Gujarati, for example, we have a great record system for that. And so the best way to teach people to search in Gujarati is just talk to them. Don't try to type it. Much simpler. Anybody else? Yes?
So I was thinking about, you had the whole example,
Yeah.
when the whole
Yeah.
pulling it out. So I kept thinking about when we're using the word name in terms of like searchers, like expert searchers and non-expert searchers. The thing is, like, now there are so many platforms that we operate on that the word starts shifting the minute you start shifting from an application to an application.
Correct.
So I'm just curious to know from, because like you've been like really looking at the corpus of the web for a while. So in terms of like what are some of the if I start using a new app right now, how do I not make a fool of myself? How do I make sure that the content that I'm looking at is like really legit?
Yeah. I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, you put your finger on a really interesting problem. There are a couple of books that try to teach universal principles of query systems. So, for example, everything that uses SQL. This is the 4 concepts you need to know. Everything that uses faceted search. These are the 3 concepts you need to know. That kind of thing. So I think there are certain universal properties that you don't teach. So, for example, faceted search, right, is an important one. But people keep producing new apps, and they don't necessarily follow any previous guideline. It's 2 guys in a garage in lower Hyattsville. Who knows, right? So, to that extent, let me put it positively. There's huge efflorescence of ideas and query systems that are coming out. Not all of them will survive. Okay? So, for example, the way you use the plant ID UI is very different than you use any other UI. So, again, do not use that on mushrooms. Do not use that on mushrooms. Right? But the point is, you take a picture of something, and then it knows where you're located, and then you can give it advice, like, it's a producing industry. So that's a funny thing. So I don't know the answer to that. So we live though in this interesting, constant evolving ecosystem where apps rise and they go away. So one of the meta skills, I have a different talk on what I call meta literacy for user interfaces, which is learning how to learn to be literate with respect to the language of taught by that system. Great. Anybody else?
One more, going once, going twice.
Declare success. Declare victory. Thanks you, Dan.